Hello, this is Chance Dunlap. I'm gonna talk about some of my Bud Stewart made musky and pike size baits. Um, just like all the rest of Bud's work, these come in an unlimited array of variations and surface finishes and many unusual hardware decisions and just sometimes bizarre pieces and parts, modified things. Um, I just think they're a lot of fun. Um, they were probably used for musky fishing, but I think Bud really targeted pike a lot. I have a lot of photos in my collection of Bud and his friends with pike from the area of Michigan and that they lived and even up into Canada. And I just think even within the world of musky baits, where creativity is a center point of many of the designs, I think Bud made a whole lot of variations that are really cool throughout his career. Some of his most desirable pieces are his ducks. He made some earlier ducks, which these three that I have currently in my collection are considered as the earlier baits, likely from the 1940s. Um, this one's the smallest of the three I have. I mean, it's very hand carved, handmade. Um, you know, I, this propeller is, I don't think it's hand cut out, but it kind of looks like they might be, but I'm not sure. Maybe they're just kind of crudely stamped out. This one has this unusual rubber skirts on these hooks, which I hadn't seen before on his baits. Um, this surface. I mean, look at that. It's really kind of coarse and gnarly looking. Supposedly, he would apply the paint and then heat them, and it would get the paint to kind of blister and bubble. I think that's a cool surface. Even put the little striped, the little wing details on there. I just think these are really cool. These are rare enough that the paint being off of the eyes is really no big deal. There's just not that many of these. Supposedly, these ducks he only made as special order items at sporting shows. Um, this one has propellers at the front and back too, kind of a long, elegant form. The paint is kind of thin and swirly. He may have applied some heat to this one, but it's not nearly as dramatic as the other one. This piece is actually in Frank Barron and Ray Carver's really excellent book that covers many baits that Bud made. Um, we're lucky to have that book to help us identify these. Here's another duck that's unusual. It has feathers applied to it rather crudely. It has these spots all over it. A little different form than the others, but really neat. One thing about Bud is he was using, I think, whatever hardware he could get. Maybe those giant eye screws on the belly to secure the hooks. I mean, they're not in proportion to the bait, but they work. Some other desirable Bud Stewart baits are these muskrats. Bud became known as the Rat Man because he had a business where he would buy and sell furs, and then of course he would use some of that material in his lures, and then he'd sell those into the market. This is an earlier one, probably 1940s as well, kind of like the ducks. It has this kind of crude, swirly paint on the head. It has evidence of little whiskers added, little these are the ears look like little propellers that have been cut in half and used as ears rather than props. Relatively simple. Look at the paint. Got these big hooks with these red plastic weed guards that Bud was known for using, and a rubber tail. These are pretty rare as well, especially these earlier ones. This muskrat is a little bit later one. You can see he actually signed it. These were made later on. Really, I think for more of the collector market, because he was signing them kind of like an autograph. You can see it still has kind of swirly looking paint, but the ears are now this fiber, flexible material. Has a commercially available, maybe herders or somebody sold these propellers. Still covered in fur. Just a little different than that earlier one. Maybe a little more cutesy. But a really nice piece for a Bud Stewart collection. But the earlier one is a lot harder to find than this variety, but these are still desirable. Bud really liked making what was called hammer handles, which would be, small little skinny pike that they also call snakes. This is a neat one with, multiple joints and has this tail here at the back. A lot of these have a rubber tail that he inserted into the rear section, but you find them sometimes with these cut. I guess those are plastic. This one's cool because it has a really nice color to it. It has some red under the diving lip too. I don't, maybe I just haven't seen enough of them, but I don't think I see that too often. These are big baits. This thing's almost, 12 inches in length. So the diving lips on these, are very simple. They're actually shoe horns, old nickel-plated shoe horns. And these are actually some that Frank Barron had sent me years ago that actually came from Bud's shop. They're not worth anything, but just the fact that they came from Bud's shop is kind of cool. But he would cut those down and add them to the baits. Here's another one. You can see that shoe horn's been cut. One thing about Bud's baits, he sold the company later on. They became the Ratman lures, and some others copied them. Those guys pretty much evened out the hardware. They would use the holes they would drill the holes all in a line and nice and neat. There wouldn't be much variation, but just look at the way that one's secured. There's none of those holes really lined up true in any way. They're just sort of like, I need to put a screw in there, so there it is. These kind of squared off baits are really cool, probably from the 1950s, maybe the late 40s. Relatively simple, but the way he airbrush painted them, really neat. He made some decoys very similar to this form as well, but I don't see the fishing lures very often. These suckers are really neat. Look at all the belly weights in that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 6, I think, belly weights in that one. It's almost a decoy. Has the dome eyes that he used on most of the decoys. This one has the cut down shoe horn as well. Line tie is just a twisted piece of wire rather than the Luxon kind of commercially made line tie that a lot of them have. But you can see the little mouth, scalp, little snout there of a sucker. This white one's odd. You don't really see just solid white ones very often, so I was kind of happy to get this one a couple of years ago. In the 1950s, I think Bud really perfected his musky baits and probably the way he really wanted to. This one has something to watch for. Most of them have the shoehorn lip, but this one has the shiny shiner convertible wiggler spoon lip. He used to sell these. He would paint these metal spoons and sell them as a couple different fishing lures. They were very popular. But I guess at some point he had enough of them left over that he just started using them as diving lips. And so it's a very similar form to the white one I showed, but more of a straight profile rather than curved like the other. Look at the hardware on this thing. This rear hook hanger is 2 surface hook hangers secured through a screw eye with a screw holding that. That's just wild. This one's secured with just little eye screws. And then look at the way the diving lips put on there. 4 eye screws. That's just ridiculous. But I love it. I don't know if he was out of the other screws he would use or he just whatever. Dale Bigger, who was a collector, based out of Texas for some years. He told me a story from back, it would had to have been in the 1960s, of when he lived in Michigan, and he was a trapper, and he actually did a lot of dealing with Bud in a commercial way. He would trap and go sell his furs to Bud Stewart, the Rat Man, and they became friends. And he said when he was there that he noticed that kids would come by from the area, and Bud would give them an egg carton crate, and it would have a wooden body on it, a pile of hardware, hooks, the diving lip kind of parts, and the kids would take them and put them together, and then get paid, per bait that they assembled. And so, if that story is true, I haven't had it corroborated by anyone else specifically. But if that story is a fact, that could explain why some of the hardware is real wacky on these. Kids aren't professional craftsmen. Maybe they were just like, well, I need to hold those hook hangers on there, so there's something to do it with. I don't know. But these have a nice airbrush surface where he was holding some kind of a net-like material and spraying over it. I have a big collection of archive material from Bud's estate, and there's some photos from the 1950s that have some very similar baits shown in the photos. The back of this one actually says Bud Stewart whittling tub of baits on right, taken in the early 1950s. Yeah, I mean, look at that pile of fishing lures back there. A couple of other photos from that same era. I mean, that looks like a big pile of baits right in front of him. And there's some pike heads nailed to a board. Here he is working on baits. Supposedly, Bud was just constantly whittling, and as many lures as he made, that has to be fact, because he just made loads and loads of baits. Some other variations of his suckers that are really cool are these double treble pieces, where you have one lure being followed by another, and they have that really nice airbrush surface. Clearly, this has been used some, banged around, but these are very rare, these double pieces. Has the shoehorn lip, wacky hardware, big heavy hooks. I've heard some stories, like from Ray Carver when he did some fishing with Bud. What an opportunity that they would go out on the dock and Bud would cast, and he used a very short, very stiff fishing rod, and he was really in charge of controlling the bait. He didn't really make lures that he wanted you just to cast and reel them in. He wanted you to kind of have to work them. They're real sporting baits. You had to cast them, and you were hunting, you were targeting a fish, and they, with some effort, you could really make them do that. I think Bud is really influential in terms of the wounded baits. He would make a lot of baits with big wounds on them, cuts and almost asymmetrical forms that, would, maybe entice fish to strike them just out of, kind of mercy kills. I guess you could look at it like that. Back when Bud was making his lures, musky baits were the only big lures. But nowadays, people are casting all these huge swim baits. I imagine most of these would entice a bass. Like, if I had a chance, say Lake Fork is just about an hour north of me, I would think I could take most any of these minnows in this pile and probably catch some nice fish up there with them. Bud continued making lures well up until the end when he sold his business. And, these hammer handles, I guess this one's really a sucker, actually. He's kind of got a little sucker mouth. He kind of went, and there's a lot of these spots later on, whatever he was painting over, but he went to these rubber tails that he would just split, like tire inner tube material. You see a lot of these. This one has a bunch of glitter all over it, top and bottom. And he would use these wire leaders, extending the second hook back towards the tail. These are relatively common, but finding nice, clean examples, they're all cool, and every single one of them is unique and distinctive. I mean, look at all the holes that he punched in that lip. I mean, not sure why he did that. And then another one, probably from the same era as the one I just showed. Relatively simple paint, a lot of glitter put on there, same kind of hardware. You know, he cut down the spoon lip on this one. You can see where he cut its dimensions down, smaller in diameter, but it has the rubber tail. You know, kind of a different kind of form. I think he called this a shiner, where it has this little mouth and kind of almost a flat-sided body. I think these wooden tailed pieces are really cool, and you don't see these that often. This one's a double joint. One of them is for the little tail back here. You know, that joint secured with surface hook hanger. I mean, that's just kind of, you know, use what you have on hand. Keep it simple. You know, he had a business to run. You know, I consider Bud as a real folk artist, and I think his most early work definitely is. But at the point where he was making this bait, he was really making lures in mass quantities. And so he needed to make them fast. He needed probably turnaround time in between sporting shows and orders. It was probably not a long duration. So I can see where he would, you know, cut a few corners here and there. But, you know, they're still very, very, very functional as a fishing lure. You know, this has that 1950s airbrush paint. You know, really nice. The head on this one's real nice. Nice eyes on it. And it has the shoehorn lip that really doesn't look like it's been cut down much. It's kind of the full length in there. Then probably one of the later ones in my collection is this one. He went to this gold foil surface, you know, probably in the late 60s into the 70s. Gives a lot of flash. There were a lot of other commercial lure makers who did that, and they would varnish over it and various things. But I like this one because it's actually marked. He moved to Fenton, Michigan, from Flint, because they wanted to live at a lake house and have a dock to fish from, and so he was able to do that. But he moved to Fenton, and so here's this one stamped here on the head. You know, Bud Stewart Baits, Fenton, Michigan. And this one's one of those shiner baits I was talking about with the little mouth and the flat sides, you know, rubber tail. Another lure from that era is this giant one. A couple of joints, big rubber tail, you know, long wire leader with both hooks connected to it. Big giant eye screw here. You know, cut down shoehorn lip. You know, look at that. That's really, really kind of a cool piece and just giant. It's like 14 inches in length. And probably, you know, one of my personal favorites, and actually I think I said one of those others was the latest one. This one I think actually is. I got a little carried away there. This bait has that convertible wiggler, shiny shiner kind of spoon up here. This one clearly is like a zombie wounded sucker. Look at this paint. I mean, look at that thing. These are like the spots, kind of like he did earlier on. I'm pretty sure this piece is late, probably in the late 70s into the 80s when he became popular with collectors. I'm pretty sure he kind of combined late era features of his production years with his kind of later kind of funky folk art kind of attitude that he took. Has the funky rubber tail back here. He's actually signed this one. It has the, you know, just kind of a artist signature kind of written on there. Some blood swirling paint here. Little scalloped out mouth. I just think this one's like super cool. You know, I have quite a few musky baits in my collection, and this one definitely ranks pretty high on my favorites list. Look at that thing. I think that I've talked about most of these now. I am always looking for more Bud Stewarts. I try to find ones with weird hardware and kind of strange variations that I think are uncommon and um, inspire me in my own fishing lure making. I love sitting around thinking about what Bud Stewart was doing. He has so much variety that he's one of those guys that like, I wonder what he was smoking when he made that stuff. And I appreciate the story that he did not smoke or drink at all. I can, I can identify with that myself. And down here in Texas, we we don't really do hockey much, but I've heard a lot of tales that he was a really good um, amateur hockey player, a very aggressive player. And from what I've heard about his personality, I'm sure he was a real character out there on the ice. So, um, Bud Stewart really is my fishing lure making hero. And anytime I have an opportunity to see baits he's made and study and compare variations, I'm definitely interested in doing that. So hopefully this video will give you some insights into some of his stuff, but no way is it comprehensive and definitive. Stay tuned. I will be looking for more baits and make more videos.